How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to the channel and to another Overwatch League discussion video. In today's video, I am going to be looking back at some of my 2019 Overwatch League preseason predictions. A while back, I made a similar video where I discussed caster predictions before the season began, and funny enough, I actually made a video using that exact same model right at the beginning of the season. And if you want to see some vintage ATP before he had a large following, then I recommend checking out that video after you're done watching this one. A link will be provided in the description if you're interested. Anyway though, I figured this video would make for a good laugh since we can look at everything I was right and wrong about, and big hint here, there was a lot I was wrong about. But the categories we will be discussing are the Pacific and Atlantic Division winners, the Final Four in the playoffs, the 2019 champions, the MVP, Rookie of the Year, and Most Improved Team. And that's basically the format of today's video, so with introductions out of the way, let's get started. So beginning with my two division winners, I had the NYXL winning the Atlantic and the Los Angeles Gladiators taking home the Pacific, so it would seem that I ended up going 1 for 2 here. Not too bad if I do say so myself. Starting with the New York pick, I kind of felt that they were the obvious #1 team in that division coming into 2019. Sure, the London Spitfire were the ones coming off a Grand Finals victory, but New York was a more consistent team overall in 2018, and they had more firepower in their starting lineup in my opinion. And then you have to factor in their offseason pickups of Nene and Flower, and because of that, New York seemed like they'd have a really strong team, at least on paper, that would be really hard to win against. Also, my thought process was this: there were only 3 things that held the NYXL back from greatness in year 1 in my opinion. The obvious factor was that they were chokers, but in my opinion, they also really suffered from a lack of versatility at DPS. Yes, Libero was really good and he had a super flexible hero pool, but Sabiobi and Pine didn't really have that kind of same deep hero pool. Yes, SBB and Pine were dominant hitscan players, but the moment the meta called for more Hanzo and Brig, those guys became a lot less effective. And there were moments where the NYXL wanted to run Pine and Sabiobi on specific maps, and since both of them share a similar hero pool, they were kind of doomed at any moment the team was in need of a hero that fell out of their comfort zone. Also, when this team was at the top of their game, they really depended on Sabiobi's Tracer, and with Tracer practically being useless because of Brigitte's stun and 1 combo potential at the time, Sabiobi wasn't nearly as reliable as he could have been. Along with that, the team really seemed to depend too much on playing around Jonex Zenyatta, and the moment he had to play less Zen and more Roadhog because of the meta changing the way it did, the NYXL started to struggle big time. That patient playstyle where they just waited for their opponent to make a mistake was not nearly as effective as it used to be. They just couldn't sit there and wait for Jonek to get a pick, or for him to just throw a Discord onto a target so Sabiobi or Libero could dive in and get the kill. But I saw the addition of Flower as a big time solution to these problems. Although he was kind of quiet during his time on XL2 Academy, we all knew what he was capable of after his performance in the 2017 World Cup, where he showed off a very deep hero pool where he excelled on both projectile and hitscan heroes while also making clutch play after clutch play to help South Korea get to the gold medal. I honestly kind of thought there would be few teams in the league that could contest these guys in the regular season, and not to toot my own horn or anything, but I was kind of right for the most part, I feel. After all, they would go on to lose only 6 games to 5 different teams in the regular season. Not too bad. That's excluding stage playoff games, by the way. But anyway, I was definitely way off with Flower being the piece that would be this team's savior since he barely got any playtime at all, and now he isn't even on the NYXL anymore. But at least I was correct about this team winning the Atlantic Division. I was right about their offseason pickups being of good use to them as well, but I was wrong about which rookie would rise up to the occasion, as Nene would be the one this team depended on during the GOATS meta especially. Moving on to my Pacific Division winners, we have the Los Angeles Gladiators, and looking back at it, I think I definitely put way too much trust in these guys. I think that I probably have to admit here that I did jump on the Gladiators bandwagon a bit too early. Although Fissure, who at the time was one of the best main tanks in the world, now traded to the Dynasty, the Gladiators managed to make up for that loss and then some in my opinion by signing Roar as their new main tank, and along with Roar, they also won the bidding war for his Kongdu Panthera teammate Decay. And at the time, Decay was considered to be one of the most sought after DPS prospects coming into the league. I saw both Roar and Decay as possible rookie sensations who would more than make up for the loss of Fissure. With an already strong looking core of Surefour, Hydration, Void, Big Goose, and Shaz plus these 2 new recruits, I saw the Gladiators as a true threat to the rest of the league. But unfortunately, they never really lived up to that hype. It became pretty obvious early on that there would be some growing pains with this new team as they struggled to find their footing out of the gates with a 3-4 record in Stage 1. In Stage 2, it seemed like they were starting to figure it out as they would only go on to lose lose one game that stage, but then they never really hit that peak again for the rest of the season. They still went 8-6 over the final two stages after this, but they never really seemed to hit that level I thought they were capable of reaching. Now granted, a 5th place finish in the league is quite respectable, and it makes this prediction not look as awful as it could have been, but 3 other teams from the Pacific Division still finished above them at the end of the day. They were not the elite team I expected them to be. Now, we could probably sit here all video long and talk about a whole bunch of reasons why the Gladiators were not as good as they could have been, but since there's still much to talk about, I'll just go over a few of the big ones I was able to take away from 2019. So one is that Roar really seemed to struggle. There was clear miscommunication issues between him and the rest of the team, and they never really seemed to improve all that much by the time the season was over. The GOATS meta in particular gave him a whole bunch of trouble, which is evident by how much he was dying. Hydration was kind of in a similar boat during this time period. Over-aggression was a real problem for him during this time on Brigida, and while Decay played a solid Zarya, his DPS failed to live up to the hype in my opinion. The 2 offseason signings that I thought would push this team over the top ended up not being major difference makers for the most part when looking at the big picture of how the 2019 season went for the Gladiators. They were definitely still a good team, but nowhere as good as I predicted them to be. Now it's time to reveal my final 4 predictions. So the final 4 teams I thought we'd see in the playoffs were the NYXL, London Spitfire, Philadelphia Fusion, and Los Angeles Gladiators, and all I have to say about this one is yikes. Only getting 1 out of 4 is pretty bad. As a sports fan, I think I fell too much into that trap of ranking the teams who had a lot of success in the previous season too highly. This especially goes for the Spitfire and Fusion since they were in the grand finals in 2018 and all. I figured that these teams would keep up that momentum and be dominant teams, but instead they went back to being those same inconsistent teams that were lucky enough to get hot at the right time in season 1. And I mean, the Fusion didn't even make the overall playoffs altogether, so that only makes things worse. Out of all 3 teams I wrongfully predicted to make it into the Final 4, the Gladiators were the only ones to win a single playoff series in September. None of them were close enough to even sniff the Final 4. But I mean, hey, at least I got the NYXL pick right. Gotta look at the positives, I guess. 1 out of 4 is still better than 0 out of 4. Other than thinking too highly of previous finalists though, I think my other flaw that led to my failure with these predictions has to do with being too reluctant to give new teams a chance. I valued experience way too much coming into 2019. Combine that with me probably not spending nearly enough time studying players and teams and contenders, and you have a recipe of me overlooking teams like the Titans and Spark. Next up is my 2019 championship pick, which also happened to be the NYXL. Earlier, I mentioned how I felt that somebody like Flower was going to help propel this team to a first place finish in the Atlantic Division, and I felt he would have a similar effect in what would be a dominant championship run made by New York, but we all know the story at this point. Flower doesn't contribute much at all, and the NYXL failed to capture a championship for the 2nd year in a row despite being one of the favorites yet again. To me, this team seemed far too loaded to not win at all. They maintained their core from 2018 and added in a few new pieces. They had a consistent and dependable tank line, a superstar level support line, and more talent on DPS than a majority of teams in my opinion. I thought for sure this would be their year, that they'd finally overcome that choking label, but I was very wrong. They didn't even make it to the finals once again. Although I wasn't correct with this prediction, I don't think I was all that far off. They were still one of the most dominant teams in the league, and they ended up getting a 3rd place finish when it was all said and done. Not to mention that they were just 1 map away from the big game in their winners finals loss to the Vancouver Titans. So yeah, it's a failed prediction at the end of the day, but it could have been a lot worse. Top 3 really isn't that far off, I feel like, so I don't even feel that bad about this one. Okay, now it's time to talk about my MVP selection. So I decided to go with Carpe, which ended up being a really bad choice on my part. But at the time, this pick made a lot of sense to me. He was the runner-up to Jonek for it in 2018, and I honestly wouldn't have had a problem if he won the award instead. I thought getting denied of the award by a friend of his would motivate him to play just as good, if not even better than he did in 2018. Instead, Carpe kind of slumped at times. He definitely did not play as well as he did in Season 1. His Zarya on a league-wide scale was pretty average, and while his DPS was still good, nobody was calling him a top-tier player in the league, I feel like. Not even his Widowmaker could compete with some of the other players in the league. He was probably the #1 Widow in Season 1, I think that's pretty fair to say, but there's a handful of players you can name that were better than him on that hero in 2019. I wouldn't say Carpe was bad in Season 2, it's more that he was kind of disappointing. He definitely played below my expectations at the very least. It's sad too, because we know how scary this guy can be at his peak. Carpe was without a doubt one of the best players in the world before Season 2 came. I doubt the Fusion would have won nearly as many games as they did in Season 1 if it weren't for those heroic plays of Carpe. There were many times where he just put this team on his back, and I kind of expected the same thing to happen this year. I know this selection looks pretty bad now, but I'm going to defend myself here and say that it was pretty reasonable at the time of me making it. Carpe nearly got the MVP award in the inaugural season, and I think his shortcomings, well, at least I believed his shortcomings were going to serve as motivation to make him win it this year, but instead he kind of took a few steps backwards. The big issue was GOATS, I think, for the most part. It lasted far longer than I predicted it to, and Carpe and the Fusion clearly had zero interest in playing that comp, so GOATS lasting for as long as it did really hurt the Carpe stocks. It really is a shame that he wasn't even in the consideration for the MVP selection, but it's the truth, he wasn't good enough. Next up though, we should probably talk about my Rookie of the Year prediction, and in my opinion this was probably the worst one I made. For my 2019 Rookie of the Year, I decided to go with Roar. This is like the one pick that I'm super ashamed of. In my opinion, Roar was a real letdown. I'll reiterate what I mentioned earlier by saying that Roar was failing to impress for the most part this year. His first season in the Overwatch League was a real struggle at specific points. There was a clear lack of communication between him and his teammates, as I said, and that led to him feeding on multiple occasions. He never really played at a Rookie of the Year level. I don't even know if he was a top 5 rookie at his position. Guys like Gushway, Bumper, Pokpo, Marvel, and Among, for example, were all better if you ask me, and that's only to name a few. My expectations for Roar were far too high. I expected him to at least kind of fill in the shoes left behind by Fissure, but he ended up not being a super reliable option. I think he had his moments, but it was certainly an up and down season. I honestly don't know why I thought he was going to be so good. I think my Rookie of the Year pick was just a big guess. I didn't watch a ton of him when he played for Kongdu Panthera, but during the occasions I did, I really liked what I saw. The potential was there, and he was on that team that just barely lost in the finals of Korean Contenders against Runaway. I know for a fact that other people were high on him too though, so that's part of the reason I think I jumped on the bandwagon to begin with, I suppose. I believe it was Mr. X who predicted he would win this award too, so that made me feel like this guess might not be that bad. I can defend myself and go over my reasoning behind this prediction as much as I want to, but it probably does me no good. There were so many rookies you'd probably want to take over Roar when it comes to picking a winner for this award. He failed to deliver in the way I expected him to. Plain and simple. Instead of being a suitable replacement for Fissure, he ended up being a failed experiment who isn't even on the Gladiators anymore. But I don't want to make it sound like I'm hating on Roar, by the way. I'm just trying to make it clear how far off I was from being right about my Rookie of the Year prediction. Roar probably could be a great player someday. It's just a matter of him grinding and staying motivated to show improvement. He's a young player with plenty of room for growth. Maybe he'll have the opportunity to show what he's capable of in this upcoming season while playing for the Washington Justice. But that's enough about this prediction. Now let's move on to the final category, which is the most improved team. Now, I don't believe this was an actual award that was given out at the end of the season, so I'll leave it up to you to decide which team is the most improved. I personally picked the Shanghai Dragons to win it, and I think that still holds up to be a pretty good guess. My thought process behind this decision was that there was nowhere else to go but up, really, in terms of how many wins they could get. I thought that even just going from a winless team to one that's competitive was all they needed to be in the running for this award. Also, Shanghai was actually looking like a promising team after having what looked to be a pretty successful offseason on paper. They locked up Koma, Luffy, Ding, and Yunjin, who were all on that same Kongdu Panthera roster as Roar and Decay, and they also got Diem, who immediately was being considered to be a potential superstar player at the DPS position. And to top it all off, they made a late trade for Gamsu to give them a nice upgrade on main tank while providing this team with veteran presence, good leadership, and positivity. The 2019 Shanghai Dragons looked promising. And after securing their first win in Stage 1, the Dragons would participate in 2-stage playoffs during the regular season and would even go on to win the Stage 3 crown in what, in my opinion, is one of the greatest runs in Overwatch history. Through their unique strategies and refusal to give up their DPS, they took down the NYXL, Vancouver Titans, and San Francisco Shock in back-to-back games. The Dragons had such a difficult road to get through, and yet they took down the Big Three in what would be an historic moment for this franchise, from 0-40 to stage champions, all while taking down the league's Big Three at the time. And although they would not end up making the overall playoffs, I would say they came pretty close. They took down the Fusion in the first round of the play-ins and came up just one map short against the London Spitfire in a game that would have taken them to the playoffs if they won it. Going from 0-40 to playoff contenders is a big time improvement if you ask me. Unfortunately though, I think the San Francisco Shock narrowly edged them out as the winners of this award. It's just my opinion here, but the Shock are certainly a team you have to consider for this award too, right? After coming in 9th place in the inaugural season, they came into this year and pulled off a whole bunch of accomplishments. They won the Overwatch League title, they won Stage 2, they were part of every single stage finals, while also finishing with the second best record in the league and having the MVP of the league on their team. Shanghai went from garbage to contenders, but the Shock transformed themselves from mediocrity into champions. Now again, the winner of the Most Improved Team award is in the eye of the beholder, I believe, but I personally think the Shock are the ones who truly deserve it. Shanghai's a close second, but I just don't know if I can say they improved more than the Shock. Nonetheless though, I'm pretty proud of this one. Being high on the Dragons ended up paying off. And with that being said, that is going to wrap up this video of me looking back at some of my predictions for the 2019 Overwatch League season. If you're interested in seeing more of these types of videos, then make sure to let me know down in the comment section, and feel free to give me the predictions you made while you're at it. And if you enjoyed this content, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you want to further interact with me, then consider following me on Twitter at ATP Overwatch, or by joining my Discord server through the links in the description. As always though, thank you all so much for watching today's video, I really do appreciate it, and until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.